So in Genesis, you have God creating humanity rebelling against God. God calls Abraham, through whom will come a people, through whom all of humanity will be blessed. God's people, the nation of Israel, end up in Egypt. God rescues them. They are wandering through the wilderness, and God is forming them into a people of his very own. Leviticus, we saw this yesterday, and notice how First Peter has so much to say about the formation of God's people. And it's the sojourning or the traveling of God's people through the desert that eventually gets them to the promised land, Canaan. And Deuteronomy is on the east side of the Jordan before they go into the promised land. And God is saying, in this promised land, you're going to have people of other people who you have to ensure are, in his words, eliminated. Otherwise, they're going to lead you astray. You're going to become just like them. So there's a whole lot happening. That's just a very high level overview of the narrative up to Deuteronomy. So this is what Leviticus 18, we saw this yesterday. The Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites, say to them, I am the Lord your God. You must not do as they do in Egypt, where you used to live, and you must not do as they do in the land of Canaan, where I am bringing you. So don't do what they did, don't do what they did. Be my set apart people. Do not follow their practices. You must obey my laws. Be careful to follow my decrees. I am the Lord your God. Keep my decrees and laws, for the person who obeys them will live by them. I am the Lord. Now notice 18 verse 24. Look, notice what happens. Do not defile yourselves in any of these ways, because this is how the nations I'm going to drive out before you became defiled. Even the land was defiled. So I punished it for its sin, and the land vomited out its inhabitant. God has noticed the sins of the Canaanites, and he's basically saying, don't do what they did, because they're going to be kicked out of the land. And if you do what they did, you too will get kicked out of the land. So you're wondering, well, what is some of the things they did? Please read Leviticus 18. I'll give you a taste in Leviticus 20 verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, say to the Israelites, any Israelite or any foreigner residing in Israel who sacrifices any of his children to Moloch is to be put to death. The members of the community are to stone him. You must not live according to the customs of the nations I'm going to drive out before you. Because they did all these things, I abhorred them. So who is he speaking of? Who were doing these things? Canaanites. They were sacrificing their children to God, Moloch. Verse 23. Oh, that was verse 23. So the question that we have to ask is, did they really completely destroy the Canaanites? They didn't. And in fact, if you look up, what scholars say who've done this kind of study, a lot of that language is just like exaggerated war language that the ancient Near East people would use. But also today, I mean, it's not just ancient Near East. People who, this is called like psychological warfare. I'm not a army or a historian of military and so on. So, but I've heard they used to say this in the Vietnam War. They'd say stuff like, kill them all and let God sort them out. I don't know, Jake, if you've heard that. And let God sort them out. That was what they would say in the Vietnam War. Now, do you really think the US Army was going to kill every single Vietnamese? Maybe some, but not likely. It was a rhetoric. It's a war rhetoric. But the idea is like, you know what, let's just forget differentiating between enemy combat and women and children. Let's just kill them all, and God will just sort all this stuff out. So again, these are war rhetoric, right? So some of this language is just that, it's war rhetoric. But Joshua 16 verse 10, now Joshua happens after Deuteronomy. Joshua 16 happens after they enter into the promised land. Look at what verse 10 says. They did not dislodge the Canaanites living in Gezer. To this day, the Canaanites live among the people of Ephraim, but are required to do forced labor. So it's like, so if someone says God commanded genocide, it's like, first off, we got to nuance that clearly, and then be able to also see that It actually never happened. There's more to this than meets the eye. Joshua 23 verse 7, do not associate with these nations that remain among you. Do not invoke the names of their gods or swear by them. You must not serve them or bow down to them. So why would God say that if they are all eliminated? Clearly they won't, right? Judges. Now Judges comes after Joshua. The first generation that leaves Egypt die off in the wilderness. The second generation go into the promised land. And the third generation basically forgets everything God's done. The Israelites lived among the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites. What's wrong with that picture? They're not supposed to live with them. They're supposed to actually, make sure that they're separated and get rid of them. Again, when someone hears that, they're like, wow, that's genocide. It's like, just hold on. Look at what happens in verse 6. They took their daughters in marriage, gave their own daughters to their sons, and served their gods. The very thing God said would happen ends up happening. What's the effect of this? 2 Kings 17. Now, 2 Kings 17, if I remember correctly, this is the Syrian invasion, so probably 722 BC. So Judges happened somewhere in, let's say 12 to 1300. I think I forget exactly. But you're looking at a few hundred years have gone by between Judges. After Judges, you have Saul gets to be a king, and then David's the king, and then Solomon's the king, and then a bunch of kings, and then the kingdom splits, the north and south. So 2 Kings happens a long time after Judges. And you guys with me with the timeline? Check out what happens. All this took place. What took place? The fact that Assyria came and took out the northern part of Israel. All this took place because Israelites sinned against their gods. Against the Lord, the God, sorry. There's only one God. Who has brought them out of Egypt from under the power of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. They worshiped other gods and followed the practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before them, as well as the practices that the kings of Israel had introduced. So they're practicing what the Canaanites were doing. And eventually, after, let's say, 400 years or so, went out in exile. Now, Ezra happens a long time after all of this. So Ezra is happening after the southern kingdom goes into exile in, let's say, temple destruction, 586 BC. And then Ezra is probably happening sometime in 520, they come back. I don't know exactly, I need to check my dates, but it's somewhere in like 475, 80 to 520. Don't quote me, but somewhere in that range. I just can't remember top of my head. But a long time, almost a millennium more, no, half a millennium more, after Judges. You guys with me with the timeline? Or after Joshua, actually. All these things had been done. After all these things had been done, the leaders came to me and said, the people of Israel, including the priests and Levites, have not kept themselves separate from the neighboring peoples with their detestable practice. Who are these neighboring people? Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites, Ammonites, Moabites, and Egyptians, and Amorites. And they've taken some of their daughters as wives for themselves and their sons, and have mingled the holy race with the people around them. Again, part of the challenge with this is that people take scriptures, they twist it, and they apply it to themselves. And like that, they can read the word holy race, and it can go down a completely non-biblical path. Sadly, that happens, and it's terrible. But when we read these scriptures within the context and within the storyline, what's happening is the people cast a very, very large shadow on the people of Israel, God's people, even half a millennia after, almost, or maybe longer. And God told them this. Do not join with this, because their lifestyle will convert you and not the other way around. I will get to the individual Canaanites in just a minute. But honestly speaking, this is shocking if we don't have a proper theological view of sin. That's what sin does. Sin kills us. That's what sin does. The wages of sin is death. And if we think we're going to convert others, it's more likely they're converting us. And that's why we got to be careful and mindful, because sin is an epidemic. It's a pandemic. It's a, it'll absolutely destroy us. So if someone's struggling with this, again, like I said, if their worldview is God is angry, you have a lot of work to do before you even present this stuff to them. Okay, if you present this stuff to them without dealing with that anger, you're not going anywhere fast. In fact, it's going to be more detrimental than beneficial. But as you're navigating or unpacking, again, like Jake said, if you're inviting someone to Bible talk and they said, God's angry and I don't care about, I'm not going to worship a maniac, a genocidal maniac, then you got like 2 seconds, it's hard, right? But hopefully if they're keen to say, look, I'd love to hear your thoughts about this homicidal maniac. And you could even, if for fun, you could even, or not fun, but you could even say, look, wow, really? You think I'm actually curious what evidence you have, because I don't want to worship a genocidal, homicidal, racist, xenophobic God. Maybe you need to sit down with me and teach me, because maybe I've been worshiping the wrong God. Help me out. Maybe they'll come and sit down and talk to you. That's one way of doing it. Because honestly, if God is a homicidal, genocidal, racist, xenophobic maniac, I don't want to worship him, do you? And I certainly don't want to be with him for eternity, do you? That's terrible. That's like the worst. That's hell. Like for eternity, I have to be with this God who's a maniac. Like who wants that? Like I don't want that. So tell me now while I have a chance to get out. But hopefully, as we sit down and navigate, hopefully there's some shifts and you can listen and explore. And no, just to be clear, God of the Bible is not a racist, homicidal, genocidal maniac. He's not. He's an amazing God. And he's worthy of our worship. In fact, more, not less. But let's look at the individual Canaanites. Again, when someone says that God just destroyed them all, God is fair. God is just. Can you think of a very, very, very influential Canaanite? Rahab. That's right. Rahab, the prostitute. It's a terrible moniker. I mean, that is. But anyways, let's do Melchizedek, the king of Salem, Genesis 14:18. He was a Canaanite. He was priest of God Most High. Just again, a fascinating analysis there. Don't have time for it. Who was this Melchizedek? What God was he worshiping? And he was a Canaanite. Fascinating stuff. But then Jesus is in the order of Melchizedek. Like, come on, man. You got to just appreciate God's incredible. God sees everything. God's not fooled. Oh, we all go to the ICOC. We've got all members. We have membership on the ICOC roll. We're good. God sees every single disciple. And not just, oh, you're on the roll. Huh? You're in. Isn't that incredible? Positive end on the other side. Like we can't just say, oh, because I'm in the ICOC, I'm in trouble. Or because I'm in the ICOC, I'm saved. God sees us, sees every single one of us. He's got judgment day covered. We don't have to stress about that. He's quite qualified. But I just love the fact that he would pick a Canaanite that he just said are these crazy, detestable practices. But there's that person there whom he then uses as example or whatever you call it to point to Jesus. Wow. And then Joshua 2:9. The Lord has given, this is Rahab speaking. And she says to them, I know the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. I mean, that cool? She's professing faith in Yahweh. And she is the grandmother of David. So David has Canaanite blood in him. So again, for anyone who says God's xenophobic, this and that, no, this is operating within a narrative, a story. And it's not just taking out scriptures in isolation. God is for all people, all nations, all tribes. The question actually is more, are we for God? And Rahab is. And so God's like, you're in my family, come on in. So again, is God compassionate or kind? Like I said, that answer is going to determine how you listen to or hear what I'm saying. Another way of unpacking, what does that mean to be compassionate? So again, a lot of apologetics is really listening, exploring. You answer, but really listening and exploring, and then reflecting and noticing. What does that mean to be compassionate? You know, someone goes to a judge, they have brutally raped and murdered an entire family, and they arrest the people responsible. They go before the judge, and the judge has compassion on them and lets them go. Would you say that is right? Do you think that judge did the right thing? Now, if that's not your family, I hope it's never anyone's family. But if that's not your family, you don't care. You'll be like, yeah. But if that's your family, you would absolutely not approve. So what does that mean to be compassionate? Does that mean that I'm compassionate? Compassion means I overlook someone's offense or someone who has harmed another. Is that what compassion means? Anger. What's that mean to be angry? In that situation, I just said, anger is you're righteous angry at the people who did that. That's wrong. That's wrong. So when someone says God is angry or God is compassionate, it actually requires more nuancing. It's not as straightforward. Should God not be angry at someone who did that? But again, what does that anger mean? And what does that do? So on and so forth. Does that make sense? Yeah. So again, lots of apologetics really is about listening and understanding, trying to get to trying to see what they're saying.